Te mare, comrades. Welcome to the session on the battle for pay equity. It's an exciting morning. We've got some wonderful speakers lined up for you. And before we start, we just need to run through a couple of things. First, I'd like to acknowledge all the organisers and tech support who've made this morning possible, and we'll make it go without hitch, I'm sure. I'd like to just encourage your participation. Use the Q&A to do that. And before we get started, let's start with a karakia. Tu taua mai I runga, tu taua mai I rararo, tu taua mai I roto, tu taua mai I waho. Kia tau e te mauri tu, te mauri ora, ki te katoa humie, huie, taekie. I'm obviously feeling a bit nervous this morning. Our speakers won't be. So that's brilliant that you're here. We just need to talk about how the session's going to run. Our moderator, Rochelle Stewart-Allen, will be helping us. And if we just have a look, our community code, which if you've been to any other sessions, you'll appreciate how we're going to run it. We want you to participate. We want you to be curious, to be respectful, to use this space as a way to open your minds to different ways of thinking, to get angry, to be motivated to act. So this is how we're going to go ahead. We're going to be having a great time with some excellent, robust conversations. So I would just like to take the opportunity to welcome you all again and to say thank you, a particular thank you to Brooke Van Welden for announcing that she will not be standing for Parliament at the next election. And I'm sure our speakers may well have something to say about her actions as well. So our three speakers today, Amy Ross is our first speaker. Amy is currently the National Secretary of the Tertiary Education Union, and she has an extensive background in pay equity. She's been an advisor, she's supported and negotiated in settlements, and also has been part of developing the tools that have been used in the assessments, and is such an expert that has been in the EU, also offering her support and guidance over there on the same topic. So internationally, she's renowned in this space, to the point that in 2024, she was recognised in a list of the top 50 international gender equality game changers, which I think is pretty impressive. And also recently, before joining the TEU, she was very involved in the People's Select Committee around the pay equity issue. So welcome, Amy. Our second speaker this morning will be Kera Sherwood-O'Regan, who's coming in this morning from Melbourne. So kia ora, not an oka, but actually Kaitahu, and is the president of the Disabled Persons Assembly here in New Zealand. She is a disabled climate justice expert and community advocate, and has a focus on the intersection between human rights and climate change. Kera works both locally and globally, and in 2023, Kera was named as one of the BBC's top 100 women as a climate pioneer for her work with Indigenous rights and disability. So again, pretty impressive. Congratulations. So she'll be speaking with us this morning in the second slot. And finally, rounding out our panel is Sue Bradford. Sue, I've been watching you since the late 80s and 90s, and I was always in awe of your work around unemployment workers' rights. And we know her more recently as being a Green MP for over 10 years. Since leaving Parliament, Sue completed her PhD in public policy, is now working for the Kotari Trust up north of Auckland, and importantly was recently on the People's Select Committee on Pay Equity as well. So as you can see, we've got a very impressive lineup who can tell you everything you could possibly want to know about pay equity, the problems, and where the future might lie to make it better. So let's begin, Amy. I've told everybody that you've got 7 minutes each, and then we'll be opening up for questions and discussion. And what we're going to encourage you to use is the Q&A function that you will find at the bottom of the screen in front of you. So please put your questions in there and we can pick them up, feed them back through to the speakers. So Amy, we'd like to hear from you. Locally, globally, what are your thoughts around pay equity? Thank you.
Tēnā koe, Julie, and tēnā koutou katoa. It is a real privilege to be here with you all, and I'm humbled to be on a panel with such esteemed wahine. So I have a lot of thoughts about pay equity, as you can well imagine, so I'm going to be onto it with my 7 minutes. The battle for pay equity, which is the topic of this session, is a fundamental battle that is representative of a much, much wider struggle. And this is a message that I'm really keen on us really digging into, because it's not a battle, it's not about money, fundamentally, pay equity, which seems really strange because it's literally got money in the title. But money is the result, it's the product of what is a massive fundamental shift in how we think, how we talk, and what we value. And that is a massive Trojan horse to actually open up and make visible the things which have gone unrecognized, deliberately invisibilized for so long. And these things are a product of colonialism, of patriarchy, but we are so embedded in them that they're almost invisible. And we don't even realize they're around. And I want to give you some examples of that from the pay equity settlements that I've been a part of, and that the process that we designed here in Aotearoa, New Zealand, because we love to do things next level and go the extra mile, of assessing work with Te Tiriti, really did a few radical things. It centered the worker's voice, which meant that we realized that workers, no single worker on their own, but collectively, actually have the insight and in-depth understanding into the skills, responsibility, and effort, what is actually being done in work. And being here in Aotearoa, New Zealand, we said te ao Māori, cultural skills are fundamentally integral to what makes a successful role in this country. So we built a tool around those things. And that tool, that interviewing and talking to workers for hours on end sometimes about their work, it created a little revolution. And it created a little revolution for the workers, because when you actually pull together a picture of somebody's work built on hours and hours of interview data of both the workers and the people around them, you actually see things which have never been seen before, including language, which we have to figure out, because there's not that clear language around the skills that women bring and Māori bring as well, that there is around technical male skills. So we had to create language. We had to find words to describe these skills, and that changed people's lives. We had people crying when they saw the descriptions of their work, saying, I have never thought of myself as skilled before. And employers going, you know what? I never realized my workers did any of that. So they went on a journey too. And what is amazing about that journey is that it changes something fundamental. Not just the pay, which is the outcome, the correction of that pay equity settlement, but it changes how we think about it, how we think about work. It goes from, oh, we think home support workers just have cups of tea with people, to realizing that they're integral in medical, psychosocial assessment, they're fundamental to their well-being, wrapped up in our community. They are the first eyes and ears on the ground. They have a deep resonant skill set, which touches on so many other professions. And so their mana is way upheld, and their employer's conception of their value completely shifts. And that's happened for social workers in their pay equity claim. This seems obvious when I put it like this, but it's actually behind why the pushback is so significant about pay equity, because it's actually challenging the narratives that we have been instructed with from this kind of neoliberal, patriarchal, racist system of what we think is valuable. And that has direct connections to our disabled communities who have been told for so long that they are somehow worth less because they produce less or are less productive. And that is just a mythology. But it also has links to climate. And I often talk about this example because it's the same frame that we're shifting, what we value and what we think of as valuable. And that many, many years ago, a partner of mine and I tried to buy a piece of land that was covered in beautiful, dense native bush. We thought, this is worth protecting. And the bank said, no, we're not going to give you a loan for that because it's unproductive land. So we had to let that go. Luckily, somebody else who was rich bought that land and did preserve it. Fast forward 15 years later, massive flooding, and that piece of land, that native bush, preserved all of the subsequent housing and farmland from destruction. And in other areas where there was no native bush left, huge erosion, huge destruction, houses destroyed. Suddenly, our idea of what is valuable, what is productive, has to be spun on its head, has to be challenged. So I'm running out of my time, but I want to just say that the battle for pay equity is one worth fighting. It represents a lot more than money. It's about justice. It's about reshaping our future. And it's about connections with all of these other issues. And I'm up for it, and I hope you are too. Ka pai.
Kia ora, thank you, Amy. That was inspiring, and I'm sure it'll get somebody starting to put some questions into the Q&A. Thank you. Kera, you've got a different perspective to bring to this with that intersectionality lens, which I think is going to be very helpful in this debate. So it's over to you.
Tēnā koutou. E te tuatahi tēnei te mihi ki ka atua, ko raki, ko papa, ko takaro, me ka atua o tēnei whenua a tāhua, o te whenua moimoia. Tēnei te mihi ki ka akata whenua, o ka Wurundjeri Woi-wurrung, o te Kulin Nation. O Sherwood-O'Regan ahau, me yana kia koutou katoa. Big thank you very much for having me on this session today. I'm currently calling in from Melbourne, from Naarm, on the lands of the Wurundjeri Woi-wurrung people, and just want to acknowledge that and to acknowledge them, and that sovereignty was never ceded. This was and always will be Aboriginal land, which again, as sort of Amy has touched on, all of these rights struggles, for Indigenous rights, for treaty rights around the world, climate change, all of these are interconnected with the question of pay and pay equity. And so actually I'd really like to pick up a bit from some of Amy's kōrero around, this being a story about what we perceive as valuable, because currently the story that our pay issues are telling us is that we don't value disabled people. We don't value disabled people. We don't value people doing the care required for disabled people to be safe, to be well, to live good lives, and to engage in society. And, that story really mirrors ableism as a whole, where ableism as a system is absolutely fixated with categorizing people and putting us in this hierarchy based on how much we can produce for capitalism and for industry, where it's really measuring, our value in society, as Amy mentioned, by our productivity. And in that hierarchy, it means that those disabled people who are considered acceptable are those who can work a 9 to 5 with little to no accommodation or access requirements that might possibly give our employers a tiny bit more homework or make it ever so slightly more difficult for other people to engage with us. It also sets up the system where those disabled people who can't work in mainstream employment are unacceptable, where we're not seen as valued, we're not seen as valuable, face constant discrimination, exclusion, and also I really want to emphasise infantilisation as well. And, all other disabled people sort of exist somewhere on that spectrum between whether we're considered acceptable or not, with perhaps a rare few outliers who succeed so well under capitalism that they become this new benchmark by which all other disabled people can be measured, that we all have to live up to, and that non-disabled people can fawn over, especially with, so-called inspiration porn. And of course, that is absolutely magnified across different axes of marginalised identities. So especially when we're thinking about disabled Māori, especially disabled Māori women, it operates in that same way. And I'm so pleased that Amy, pulled up on that point around climate change and also around colonialism, because we see the exact same thing where racism is absolutely obsessed with, classing and classifying people, where those of us who come from more community and environment orientated cultures who have strong value systems outside of that capitalist economy or who object to exploitation of the environment, we must be, the lowest on this hierarchy, and they class us as uncivilized and savage. And so all of this comes together in this issue of pay equity. And I think, we've got some real experts on this panel, so I perhaps won't speak as much directly to the pay equity claims, other than to say that DPA has been absolutely in support of the People Select Committee and made a submission there. But I really want to move on to really highlight how currently we have some pretty glaring issues of pay equity when it comes to disabled people. We have a cost of living that is absolutely skyrocketing, where many disabled people really do struggle to find work, or perhaps, have to be in part-time work that won't even cover their essential costs. And then we also have many disabled people who have no choice but to go into self-employment, which then can come with its own barriers and its own challenges. The big glaring omission that we constantly seem to be scared about talking about as a society is that we live in a country where our legislation not only enables the exploitation of disabled people in sheltered workshops, actually likes to sell that back to us as if this should be something that is celebrated as a common good. That this is some positive thing. Look, it's a beautiful, heartwarming story that disabled people can be paid, far less than minimum wage, and where, for what other community is it accepted that, you going to work is actually, something to be sort of pitied and really, it's a complete erosion of the mana of that work. And so, not only have we witnessed continuous repeals of disability rights protections and support services in recent years, which have pushed disabled people to rely on often very expensive and private services to meet our needs. We've seen that cost of living absolutely skyrocket to the point where we might not have a very neatly labelled disability tax that hits our wallets just the same as if we did. We also have a situation where disabled people across the spectrum are constantly facing discrimination when looking for work, looking at workplaces that are not accessible, that are not flexible, that do not meet our needs. For disabled people who are employed, think about disabled women in New Zealand who face a 15% pay gap compared to all men. Of course, made worse by all those issues that I previously talked about. So DPA is 100% behind, demanding that the Equal Pay Amendment Act 2025 be repealed. We really demand a transparent pay gap reporting and meaningful involvement of workers in our communities to close all of those pay gaps across disability, gender and ethnicity. And in particular, we absolutely want to see a repeal of the Minimum Wage Exemption Act that enables disabled workers to earn as little as $1 to $2 an hour, where those organisations that continue to profit off them literally profit off disabled exploitation by having, that funding topped up and getting the social capital of being seen as this lovely progressive enterprise. Meanwhile, disabled people are being exploited and not having their work valued. I could go on about this all day, but I think perhaps I'll just leave it there to say there are so many intersections with disability rights, with Indigenous rights, and I'm really excited to hear what the others have to say and to hear any questions later on. Kia ora.
Kia ora, Kera. Thank you. I think that's a perspective which we often don't hear, so I really appreciate your contribution in that area, something we should never overlook. But our last speaker, Sue Bradford, with some recent experience of some of that political process, so we really welcome your contribution this morning. Kia ora, thank you.
Oh, kia ora koutou and kia ora Amy and Kera. Just fantastic to hear from both of you. There's so many different angles to this, it's hard to put it together in 7 minutes. And all I can try and do, I think, is talk a little bit about the People's Select Committee on Pay Equity. And I really would like to acknowledge Amy Ross here, who was an essential part of the committee as a special advisor. As everyone can see, her knowledge is incredible and really informed, along with others, a lot of the work. In fact, probably all the work we did. Kia ora, Amy. So the People's Select Committee on Pay Equity was set up after 6th of May 2025, which was the night that Brooke Van Velden led the charge, and one outrageous night in Parliament, passing the Equal Pay Amendment Act, just simply to save money in other parts of the budget, to put into other parts of the budget, like putting $6.5 billion for support of new purchases by business and farmers on the backs of Māori, Pacifica, disabled, and women, low-paid women workers and some male workers in 180,000 or more jobs. It was so offensive, so outrageous that I think many of us were up in arms. When Marilyn Waring rang me, I think it was even the next day, and said, would I be willing to come on to a cross-party People's Select Committee to do serious work, set up a select committee process on this, I couldn't help but say yes, not really realising what an intense process I was letting myself in for. There were 10 women MPs on it, 4 who were former National Party MPs, 4 from Labour, former Labour MPs, 1 from New Zealand First, and myself from former Green MP. 3 of the MPs out of the 10 were Māori. And we certainly had a strong focus inside the Select Committee hearing on kaupapa Māori perspectives and on Pacifica perspectives, in which we were very much supported by Karanina Sumeo, who was a former Equal Opportunities Commissioner and helped support the process. So we set the committee up, and how it worked was with very little resources. We ran a campaign right at the beginning with the support of Zonta and others, which raised $40,000, and that seemed to be all we had, so we could hardly pay anyone. So all the women MPs and virtually all the support workers, including Amy, were working for nothing. And I did find a deep irony in the fact that people, when we're fighting on the issue of the undervaluation of women's work, the severe undervaluation, that this entire group, almost all women, were working for nothing and often covering our costs as well. But that shows the dedication to the issue from all concerned. I guess a big part of the process of being taken seriously and attempting to do this massive push into the public discourse against the will of the government, who just wanted to hide everything that had happened, was that we wanted to replicate a genuine select committee as closely as we could with all the different roles. So, for example, we did have Amy as our expert in pay equity and the details of that. We had our own select committee clerk, Beth Bowden. We had Len Cook supporting us, a former government statistician, and so on. So we called for submissions. We had 1,400 substantive submissions, which is incredible, because this is not a real parliamentary select committee. Those people would realise we had no power. We weren't MPs. We were not Parliament. And yet people took it so seriously right across the board. I'd really like to tautoko everyone here who might be watching this, who made a submission or supported the making one, the workers, the unions, the community organisations, people coming from a Te Tiriti perspective, and some employers as well. We heard about 30 hours of hearings, and all were live streamed and are still available. They were deeply moving, and many surprises. We all became very educated about pay equity in a way we weren't before, but so profound to hear from the workers themselves and from those that support their struggles, including the workers that Kera's just been talking about. Looking back, the intensity and integrity of the submission process, I think all of us former MPs felt it was as taken as seriously as anything we'd ever done in Parliament. And it really says something about how deeply this issue cuts into our lives, into low-paid women's workers' lives across so many occupations. We had criticism from the right-wing media that we wouldn't look at all sides of the issue, that we'd gone into it like blinded with only one point of view. This was not the case. We came from across the political spectrum. We actively sought submissions from all perspectives. And we carried out, in the last part of the process, what is called deliberation in Parliament, where you actually look at all the submissions and what they've said. and tease out where our differences lie, what we disagree on, and tried to work it through, which wasn't always easy. There were behind the scenes negotiations, shall I say, and then the committee talking with each other, just like you would on a real in a parliamentary select committee. And just, I guess people might be interested in where some of those debates were. I'm not going to name any names, but where some of the debates were is around to what extent should our final report recommend changes to the details of pay equity and how it was, how claims were pursued in the past, or should we just stick with an overarching push to return the law to the law and principles that the coalition government had overturned? Like, how much of a role should we have in forward-looking recommendations about changes, or just focus on simple overturn? What percentage of a female-dominated workforce should be the threshold for deciding a claim? The coalition government moved that to 70%, which is a very high bar. It had been 60%, and there was some debate about that, but we ended up recommending that we should definitely return to the original 60% because it's a very high bar to go beyond that. And another debate was around if and when pay equity is restored, what kind of institutions should there be to make sure that it's not only operating well, but that oversees it at a high quality. So looking ahead, what happens now? Obviously, we're going into an election campaign, and I think for anyone that cares about this, we need to be very clear on the three political parties that push this through. That is not only ACT, it's not only national, it's also New Zealand First. They are all culpable, and I hope people will carry that into any election campaigning or get out the vote campaigns you're involved in. The report is there. It's 170 or so pages. It's a massive resource for anyone wanting to campaign on pay equity, and I really invite people to get this on the agenda, and above all, to lobby Labour, who will, if they become part of the next government, hold a critical role in whether this legislation is thrown out and the old legislation or a better form of it reinstated or not. Kia ora koutou.
Kia ora, thank you, Sue, and thank you and everybody on that committee for the stellar work that was done, just showing that the people do have power. So thank you. Look, we've got time now because we've just heard from our three panelists about their views on pay equity and different aspects of it. And we have already one question into the Q&A from Oliver, who asks, in what ways can we use current discussions about the right to equal pay for work of equal value to advocate for a new pay equity framework to more explicitly deal with pay inequity affecting people on the basis of other intersectional issues, e.g. ethnicity and disability? So, you know, the focus has always been around gender, and we hear all the time that, you know, that is the beginning, but it's way too limited. So if any of our panelists wish to come back to that question, I'm sure you would. Amy, you're smiling. Kera, you're smiling. Who'd like to go first?
I'd love to have the first crack at that, because I think there's a couple of things there, and I think we need to be smart about how we go forward, because what the improvements to legislation are definitely needed in terms of what we did have. Even if we repeal everything, go back to what it was, we know that there's improvements needed. But we have to be careful that part of what we need to do is also in the operation of that law. So the development of Te Tiriti, which recognised cultural competencies, in particular Te Ao Māori, was developed under that previous framework because it actually references just a line in that matters to be assessed, still there actually, cultural skills that must be assessed in terms of recognising undervaluation. And so we were able then to see a correction for Kaiarahi te reo, which is a completely Māori workforce of an average of 70%, which recognised, I think, gender and ethnic undervaluation. So I don't think we had a framework which was inoperable in terms of doing that. And I would be cautious about losing it, becoming so prescriptive that we lose our ability to really innovate and have a system designed by Māori, like that was. Te Tiriti, that entire part was designed by Māori wahine. But at the same time, I would also like to see a deeply embedded reference to Te Tiriti and upholding Te Tiriti in there, because I think that should actually just be in every piece of legislation that we have as a foundational document. Yeah.
Thank you, Amy.
Yeah.
Kera.
Perhaps I can jump in just briefly on that point. Absolutely echo what Amy's saying. And also, I think, for DPA, a lot of the basis of our work is Te Tiriti, and then also the UNCRPD, the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, that does have a number of articles that are relevant, like Article 5 that talks about equality and non-discrimination, 16 around freedom from exploitation, violence and abuse, which is huge. Of course, our employment also contributes to living independently and being included in the community, which is Article 19 of the CRPD. And then we have explicit references around work and employment in Article 27. And I think we sometimes forget that our government has actually already technically agreed to all of this. They've already agreed that this is something that they need to do. And when we had our review from the UNCRPD, or when New Zealand had its review from the UNCRPD committee in 2022, it's been a constant issue talking about things like minimum wage exemptions. And the UNCRPD made some very, very explicit recommendations in their concluding observations around repealing Section 8 of that Minimum Wage Exemption Act 1983 to ensure that disabled people are paid on that equal basis and for work of equal value. They also talk about expediting the development of a disability employment action plan and the need for that to be consulted, the need for that to be done in close consultation and with the active involvement of our communities, particularly naming people with disabilities, Māori and Pacifica persons with disabilities. And what we've seen, I think, in the recent New Zealand disability strategy, unfortunately, is, the government highlighted employment as one of their 5 priorities. And they sort of said everything outside of those 5 priority areas, we don't really want to hear about it, as if our lives as disabled people can be distilled down into these 5 buckets. But even still, even with having these recommendations from the CRPD committee, from having, decades and decades of activism from disabled people, and particularly, I really do need to labour the point that this majorly affects people with learning disability. And again, that's where the infantilisation really comes in very strong. It's extremely patronising. But there have been decades of activism and precedent saying, why do we still have this ridiculous act that makes absolutely no sense, that is absolutely discriminating against disabled people? And so I'm sort of the view that we do have a lot of these human rights instruments, and if we can make sure that there are strong references, in the system that we're setting up, that it's really clear and being grounded in Te Tiriti, as Amy said, and being grounded in, UNDRIP, the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, and in the CRPD on disability, and various other agreements. Let's hold the government to account on things that they've already said that they would do. And then, as Amy's talking about, make sure that we're in that space where the operationalisation, which is a big word I always struggle to get out, it is actually really manifesting in those outcomes for our community. But I could go on again all day about, the various things that our government has already signed up to, and that does kind of apply across the, party political spectrum as well. We've also, we've had so-called progressive governments that have failed to implement this. And of course, we have a particularly repressive government at the moment too, who has just completely ruled out even these most basic recommendations from the work that they are supposedly doing on disability.
Thanks, Kera. And you make a really good point. We already have in place a number of instruments which allow us to have a platform to be arguing for these things. So it kind of leads into the next question, which is about when we vote this coalition government out in November, how can we ensure that the next coalition government commits to pay equity for undervalued workers? It's a tricky question, isn't it? But I mean, that is the point. We don't want to vote out a government because we don't like them. We want to be voting in a government because they are actually going to do what we need them to do. So any thoughts on that from any of the panelists?
Yeah, I would like any party who commits that they will implement the recommendations from the People Select Committee report, then that is a commitment to real change based on deep consideration of evidence given from such a variety of perspectives. I think that people need to step up with not just "I'm committed to pay equity" statements, because that is exactly the statement that they made when they disestablished the Pay Equity Task Force with experts and we were succeeding in delivering pay equity. That is exactly the message they gave. They were committed to pay equity when they did this ram raid of our world-leading framework and rolled it all back. So we want real, tangible commitments, and the People Select Committee report delivers those very detailed recommendations. So I want to see parties committing to that and saying as well, if they intend not to do them, why not and what they'll do instead. Real answers.
Cheers. Thanks, Amy. Sue?
Kia ora, it's kind of where I finished up. Tautoko everything that Amy's just said. As people might have gathered, my apprehension is around how committed a Labour-led government would be to following up on the recommendations of our committee and of actually reversing the legislation and going forward towards a fair system again, because everything I've seen is that they're dodging around the issue, like they're not wanting to commit. And I think that's not, they'd like to, they try to, but they're probably really worried about the money, the budgetary side. But I would hope that everyone that cares about this does everything we can to lobby all political parties, but to particularly, I think particular pressure from unions and workers needs to go on Labour, wherever we can, to say, if you're serious about this, don't just talk nice words about it, because of course they do that. Go beyond the nice words and actually make the commitment. Understand that there are we all know there's budgetary considerations, but as long as you just say, oh, they can just be left behind because low-paid women workers, people, and don't count, we just continue to go on forever like this. And so it's really serious. And I hope that people will treat this as that right through from now till November, and really let everyone in the Labour, everyone standing for Labour and the key people within that party know that we want a serious commitment, not just nice words.
Thanks, Sue. Look, I think this issue may be surprising to some, but it has certainly pushed the buttons of the public across all sorts of areas. It is something which people really care about. And we've got a question here from Catherine Delahunty, and maybe it's not a surprising question, and I think it goes to the very heart of the problem. Catherine's question is, does the panel think that capitalism will ever deliver pay equity? So I think here we're getting to the point of what allows the ongoing issue of inequality in our society. So who'd like to have a bit of a rant about this one?
No is the short answer,
yeah.
I think. And, I was a bit naive, I think, in my sojourn into public service, because, when I thought in my heart that when the government said we're committed to eradicating the gender and ethnic pay gap, that they kind of meant it, that then we would do it. And so when I was designing tools and implementing things, and we were getting settlements, people started to freak out. And I was like, but this is kind of what we're doing it. Look, everybody's like amazed internationally at what we're delivering. But there is a genuine ideological freak out because capitalism, because neoliberalism, patriarchy, and that bromance, I think that was so aptly described at People Select Committee. And so, but that's why that pay equity is that Trojan horse that I was talking about, because it actually peels off the ugly veneer and shows us that the underbeast, the underbelly, that like capitalism requires poverty, and that loves that poverty to be women and disabled people and Indigenous people. And so it makes us look hard at what's really going on and say, what is it that we're valuing? Why is it that somebody who looks after people earns 10,000 times less than somebody who looks after money. You know, it's toxic.
Absolutely. If I can just jump in here, I think I should state that, you know, in terms of speaking from the perspective of DPA, you know, I perhaps have to steer a little bit away from some of the more party political kōrero, in the sense that, you know, we're committed to working with any government that is going to, you know, uphold disability rights. And we can all perhaps infer which kinds of government that is more likely to be. But if I could sort of park that hat and maybe just put on, just to be clear that I'm speaking with my personal hat here, my answer to the capitalism question is also no. I don't think that, you know, I think, as Amy's mentioned, capitalism is absolutely founded, you know, ultimately on some people being able to accumulate, and some organisations and our corporations having, you know, the power that previously was held, you know, at the level of, you know, an entire state and a collective of people is now being consolidated, you know, and one company or organisation headed by people who just earn astronomically. And I don't even want to almost say earn, because part of the thing with capitalism, and here's my side rant, is that, you know, we look at people, you know, that we're talking about today who are not earning, you know, are not being paid what their work, you know, should be, who are not being recognised, who are not being valued. Meanwhile, we are allowing wealth to accumulate. We are allowing billionaires, we are allowing people to accumulate obscene amounts of wealth that they did not earn, because it is the workers that they're profiting off. It is the people underneath them that they are profiting off. And that is not earned. That is not earned money that Jeff Bezos and all of these other, you know, people who are doing other astronomical harms to our planet and to our communities, they have not earned that. They have exploited and stolen that from people who have actually provided that value and have provided that work. And I think that this is where, you know, one of the real challenges is, you know, how do we do what we can within the system that we have currently got, while at the same time really being clear that the system is never going to deliver, the current system is never actually going to deliver us, you know, what we all know we really need. And so I think, you know, I think we shouldn't let, you know, our despair about the state of capitalism, you know, detract us from the real importance of doing this work still. We can do both at the same time. Sometimes it feels really difficult to do that. But I think if we keep that sort of end goal in mind, then ultimately what we're doing is starting to lay some of those foundations that it might not be our generation. It might not be our generation that can topple capitalism, you know, as a whole and as a system. It might not be our generation that can completely dismantle ableism right now. We have to trust that, you know, we are all here doing what we are doing right now because of the whakapapa of these movements, because of the generations that have gone before us. We're able to do the work that we're doing now, and it will be those future generations, you know, who are able to, I guess, materialize the change that we're working for now. And one of the big things I find so infuriating about capitalism as well is it does go absolutely hand in hand with all of these other systems of oppression: ableism, sexism, racism, colonialism. All of it goes hand in hand and props each other up. And it goes hand in hand with individualism. And that individualism keeps us focused on our experience right now in this moment, and whether we can pay our bills, whether we, you know, are being paid what we're worth, which are all really important things. But this whole system is designed to disconnect us from that whakapapa, from those movements before us, and from the generations in front of us. So I have a huge amount of despair and frustration about capitalism, but I still think it's worth fighting the fight. I still think it's worth fighting the fight for pay equity in the system that we currently have, because any change that we make will be, you know, we never know in 20 years' time what will be that little point that actually our future generations are able to pin off, and they're going to look back and go, thank God somebody did it back then.
Could I just very quickly add, because Kera and Amy have put it beautifully, kia ora, in response to Catherine's question, I'd just add that the stripping off of the structures and seeing what's really underneath has been an important part of the inquiry into pay equity, like just seeing it unpeel before our eyes about exactly where this fits inside capitalism and inside racism and patriarchy and ableism, tying it now, and the importance, even though we know capitalism is very unlikely to be defeated or moved beyond in the near future, the importance of tying pay equity into the broader struggles around income redistribution, massive changes to our tax system, how Kera's example of how people are still paid this incredibly low wages. I'm really glad you brought that up about this incredible attitude to people with disability that's still there and legal. So tying it to all the different aspects of income redistribution and seeing it inside that larger picture, but one where we have done groundbreaking work, thanks to so many people, including Amy, that we can lead again in that. We don't have to wait for the end of capitalism to try and restore and refresh and improve the system. All that work you did, and so many other people, can be restored and could be very soon, actually, if there was a will. So the second thing is that this struggle is about workers' wages now and how low those wages are, and to see these whole massive workforces of people doing such valuable work for such low pay and so disrespected, and ultimately hugely, it was just dreadful to see the disrespect that the government has shown to all these workers and how they felt, the impact on them, the impact on workers who just the body blow of that one night under urgency, the loss of the 33 claims, just all the work that had gone into those claims overnight, just gone, including for the employers of those workers, not just for the workers themselves, but it's actually how much people get in their hand each week to buy the food, and we all know what's happening right now. That's another thing. We can't wait to try and bring those workers' wages up into being fair again, which is why the pressure has to keep going now. Yes, we can see it inside the wider struggle against capitalism and colonisation, but it's also a really urgent for the immediate. Kia ora.
Yeah, look, thanks for all your comments on that. It is a tricky one, isn't it? Because we need to be doing what we can do while the bigger scheme and strategy is underway. And we need to keep our eye on that. And Kera, I think what you've been able to do today is really highlight at a micro level something very real for a part of our society who too often get overlooked, and the reality of that. And Sue, you're right, with the current global political situation, I think we're going to see more and more the highlighting of how difficult our structure here in New Zealand is shortchanging people. We've got another question which we have time for. It's a tricky one, of course. Patty, thank you very much. Government have made commitments and then not implemented them, which we've already commented on. But I know it's a complex question, but how do you influence people in power to provide pay equity? You know, we get a choice every 3 years to cast our vote. What can we be doing? Because that obviously is not enough.
I think that from mine, it's making it so politically unpalatable that they cannot not deliver. And so it becomes such a high cost issue that it's one of the issues that governments won't touch. They don't want to not deliver, they don't want to not support, they don't want to not get behind. And I think we've begun this now because there's been such a huge outcry about what this government has done to pay equity. And also a big lever for me is about educating people, because by design, they have made it appear that pay equity is this technical, complex, so hard subject that you can't possibly engage in, or you plebs. And it's so expensive and costly, and freak people out about money. They don't ever ask the question, the cost for whom? That $12 billion is the $12 billion that women workers are subsidizing our economy. That's the real cost. But actually making the conversation about pay equity, the empowerment of workers, the fact that pay equity is about mana, fundamentally, that education project is one that I am really committed to. And so people feel empowered that they own this conversation and they can go and have it with people in power and make it like, this is my bottom line. and then we make it impossible for them.
I think there's real scope here too. I've been hammering on about Labour and Labour voters and Labour candidates and so on, but there's also real scope with the National Party and the traditional kind of people that support National, because all the former National women MPs on the Select Committee obviously took the step to engage with this in a wonderful way. But also what came through in the submissions was how many in the wider women, how many women across this is an issue that cuts across women and against patriarchy. It's not a men, women right across the political spectrum can see how the evil that has been done by this legislation last year. And I think there's real scope to appeal to women, particularly in what one would like rural communities. We had really strong representation from rural communities, which can see the impact on their health services, on disability services, education locally, like in terms of they can't keep work, the pay's so low, they can't get or keep workers. So rural communities are often quite conservative. So I think there's also men. We also heard from men who are allies of women in this struggle and can see how grossly unfair this is and undervaluing these whole workforces of workers that are so critical to our society and economy. There's also employers. There are also employers who support pay equity. So not shutting our eyes in terms of lobbying, advocacy and working with different groups of people, women's organisations, rural organisations, and of course many community groups to keep this issue right in the front of people's minds. And I wonder ultimately if there were enough to shift even the National Party. I don't know, but it'd be a great thing to see.
Yeah,
Thank you, Sue.
At risk of just saying I want to co-sign everything that Amy and Sue have said, I think the question around people in power also makes me think of how much power do we also give to some of these systems and to some of these people by the way that we interact with them? So, of course, we have that opportunity, every 3 years, and it's really important that we do make the most of that. And, of course, for DPA, we're going to continue doing our advocacy. We're going to be pushing, these kinds of kaupapa ahead of the election. And I think, it is really critical that we make sure that this is that this is a topic that these are actually feeling the pressure to go, shit, we really actually have to have a really good stance and we have to be able to back this up and we have to be convincing that we're actually going to deliver rather than giving vague notions of support or sort of lip service to the kaupapa. We absolutely should be doing that. But I think we also need to recognise the power, some of the people in power, as Sue's just touched on, are employers. And, we can do that by encouraging employers and making sure that we're prioritising and supporting and saying, well, actually, we want to give our support towards, towards organisations that do practice what they preach and do practice those values and do, put pay equity into practice. That support unions that have a livable wage, that don't engage. And on that same note, when it comes to thinking about different organisations and their social licence to operate, where we can as a community sort of shift our thinking and recognise, hey, actually, it's not a cute story on the packaging that disabled people have, contributed to this product being made when that's coming off the exploitation. That's not a cute, nice social good that we all want to be promoting collectively. We're going to call that what it is. We're going to call it exploitation. We're going to be honest about what that is. And we're going to, in all of our own lives and our own organisations and the spheres of influence that we have, go, hey, actually, maybe we need to do better to be able to support people with learning disability and disabled people, to have meaningful employment elsewhere, so that we, as a collective are eroding the system as well. We don't just have to wait for Parliament's permission as much as we should be, pushing this kaupapa when it comes to the election cycle. And I think lastly, think sort of lastly, because I know that we need to wrap up, I just really think that as a collective, and particularly as disabled people, knowing that this has come from some disabled people on the call, this partai, we are such a huge portion of the population, you know, and we're such a huge portion of that care workforce, you know, majoritarily women, and many of those people have health conditions or disabilities, and even if, you know, they might not, you know, personally identify politically as disabled, can also be supported by disability rights and by disability justice. And so I think, you know, having that cross-movement solidarity, you know, and recognising that pay equity is tied up with disability rights, and the disability justice movement is tied up with the Te Tiriti justice movement, is tied up you know, with all of these intersectional movements, that actually helps to put some of the power back on us and recognise that this is, you know, we're not a small minority, you know, who are asking for equal pay and who need our work to be respected. This is actually an issue that I think the vast majority of people do care about and have a stake in.
Kia ora, thank you, Kera. And I think we have come to the end of our time. And look, I'd just like to say it's been amazing. You've been offering up some wonderful conversation and making great points. And it is a complex issue, but I think it isn't. And I really like the beginning point, Amy, where you said it's not about money. And if we keep that out of the conversation and actually talk about things like how do we want our society to be, how do we want to be fair and equitable to everybody in it, so everybody gets acknowledged, everybody can flourish and gets valued. It's a pretty simple argument, I think. But it is a complex process we're going through. I just want to make a couple of statements as we wrap up. I just want to thank everybody, particularly the panelists, Amy, Sue, and Kera. It has been delightful getting to hear your contributions today. I think it's just been a wonderful session. And I'd also like to thank Josh, Ray, and Johnny for all the tech support, getting this together. Cats don't even come close to describing this, but we managed to get it all on the day. So well done to those three men for helping us. Also, Rochelle, you're moderating. Thank you so much, keeping me in line. I've appreciated that. But also thank you to all of those participants who put up partai and were hopefully deeply engaged in this conversation that we've been having this morning. And I just think that this opportunity that Decol 26 offers to us is just fantastic. It gives us an opportunity to be talking about the things that actually matter, and hopefully is going to be getting us well fired up for November 7. And we're going to put the pressure on because it is so important. I think there is a couple of slides, Johnny. We just have to acknowledge the partners to this event, and I'm really pleased to see some of those up there, particularly the TEU, because I'm a member, but we can see there are many organisations who support the work that is being done by this group, so thank you to those who support it. There is also some partner associated events which you can find on the website to get all the details that may well be of interest as well. So I think that's all I needed to do to make sure that you were well-rounded in your finish. Just to say that, again, thank you, and thank you to those who make this opportunity. So with a closing karakia, kia tau tō rangi Māori ki runga I ngā iwi o te ao. So let your peace reign on all the people of the world, and never has that been a more important message. So go well, everybody. Thank you again. Have a great day. Keep up the fight. This is a fight we will not stop. Thank you.